Chapter 1: The Invitation. Tom had always tried to forget his years at boarding school. It was a period of his life that he'd rather not revisit. Yet, a curious invitation arrived in the mail that he could not ignore. It was an invitation to attend a reunion at his old boarding school. At first, Tom was hesitant to accept the invitation, but memories of his time at the school began to flood back. The nostalgia and curiosity eventually won out, and he decided to attend the reunion. He packed his bags, and before he knew it, he was on his way back to the place where he'd spent some of his formative years. As Tom traveled back to the school, he couldn't help but think about his time there. He remembered the friends he'd made, the classes he'd attended, and the strange incident that had occurred on the playing fields. He wondered if he'd ever find out the truth behind that eerie occurrence. Upon arriving at the school, Tom was greeted by the familiar faces of his old classmates. They hugged, shook hands, and exchanged warm greetings. As they caught up on old times, Tom shared his recollection of the strange incident on the playing fields. To Tom's surprise, his old friends had not forgotten about that night. In fact, some of them even remembered hearing stories of other strange happenings around the school. The conversation intrigued Tom, and he felt a sense of excitement building within him. As the group reminisced about their old times, Tom couldn't help but feel a tinge of nostalgia. He had not realized how much he missed the place and the people. And even though he'd come to forget his past, the memories were still there, just waiting to be reawakened. Chapter 2: The Arrival. As the group made their way towards the main building, Tom's heart skipped a beat as he spotted the old oak tree by the playing fields. It was there, under the shadow of that tree, where he and his friends had witnessed something they could never explain. Tom's mind drifted back to that night. It had been their last year at the school, and they had decided to sneak out after lights out and play football under the stars. They had been having a great time until they heard a strange rustling sound coming from the nearby bushes. They had thought it was just an animal, but then they saw a figure moving in the darkness. It had been a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, and it had seemed to be watching them. They had all frozen in fear as the figure moved closer, and they had only snapped out of it when one of their friends had screamed and run off. They had never been able to explain what they had seen that night, but they had all agreed that it had been something supernatural. As they walked through the halls of the old school, Tom and his friends swapped stories and caught up on old times. Tom shared his memory of the incident at the playing fields, and his friends were just as spooked as he was. They all agreed that they should go back to the playing fields that night and relive their youth. Tom's heart raced at the thought of going back to the scene of the supernatural incident. He felt a mix of excitement and unease, but he was determined to face his fears and see what had truly happened that night. As they made their way towards the playing fields, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. As they reached the edge of the playing fields, Tom's heart leaped into his throat as he saw the old oak tree looming in the distance. He swallowed hard, knowing that they were about to confront their fears and find out once and for all what had happened that fateful night. Chapter 3: The Game Begins. The cool night air enveloped Tom and his old classmates as they stepped onto the playing fields. They could barely make out the white lines and the goalposts in the darkness, but they didn't care. They were here to relive old memories, to forget their adult responsibilities, and to have fun like they did when they were young. Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as they began to set up for their game of football. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows just beyond the reach of their vision. But he pushed these thoughts aside and tried to focus on the game. As they started playing, Tom couldn't help but notice that some of his teammates were missing. He called out their names, but there was no answer. They were nowhere to be found, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, somewhere in the darkness. Then, they heard it. A strange, otherworldly noise that made their skin crawl. Tom's heart raced as he realized that they were not alone. There was something out there with them, and it was closing in fast. The remaining players began to panic, stumbling over each other in their attempts to flee. Tom tried to keep his head, but the fear was overwhelming. He could feel the ghostly presence getting closer, its icy breath on the back of his neck. Suddenly, one of his friends screamed, and Tom turned to see that he was gone. Vanished into thin air, just like the others. Tom and his remaining teammates were alone, trapped in a nightmare. As they regrouped, they realized that they had to get out of there before it was too late. But as they tried to make their escape, the ghostly presence seemed to be closing in on them with each passing moment. They ran towards the old school chapel, hoping to find refuge there. But as they burst through the doors, they realized that they were not alone. The ghostly presence was there, waiting for them, its cold, vengeful eyes fixed on their trembling forms. Tom and his friends knew that they were facing a powerful and malevolent entity, one that had been haunting the school for decades. They had to find a way to break the curse and put the spirit to rest, or they would be trapped in its clutches forever. In the darkness of the chapel, they sought the help of an old schoolteacher, one who had known the truth about the playing fields and the curse that had plagued it for generations. Together, they uncovered a way to break the curse and lay the spirit to rest, but it would not be easy. As they prepared to confront the ghostly presence, Tom and his friends could feel their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that they were risking everything, but they had no choice. They had to put an end to the nightmare that had been haunting them for so long. The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would decide the fate of everyone involved. The ghostly presence loomed over them, its eyes burning with an icy fury. But Tom and his friends stood firm, determined to end the curse once and for all. Chapter 4: The Haunting. Tom and his friends huddled together in the old school chapel, their hearts pounding with fear. The malevolent spirit that had been pursuing them since they set foot on the playing field seemed to have followed them into the safety of the chapel. Their only source of light was the flickering candles on the altar, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The creaks and groans of the old building only added to the sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air. Tom's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. They couldn't stay in the chapel forever, but they were trapped. Every time they tried to make a break for it, the spirit would appear, blocking their way. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the chapel into complete darkness. Tom could hear the others whimpering in fear beside him, and he knew they had to act fast. In the pitch black, they scrambled to their feet and made a run for the door. As they burst out of the chapel, they were greeted by a bone-chilling sight. The playing fields, normally so familiar and comforting, were now a twisted, distorted version of themselves. The trees were gnarled and twisted, and the grass was blackened and burnt. In the distance, they could hear the sound of something breathing, a raspy, wheezing noise that filled them with dread. Tom knew they had to keep moving, even though every instinct in his body told him to turn and run. They crept through the fields, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The spirit seemed to be toying with them, making itself known with small, malicious acts. Footsteps could be heard behind them, though no one was there. A cold wind would brush past their cheeks, though the night was still. Suddenly, they came across something that stopped them dead in their tracks. One of their classmates, who had gone missing earlier in the night, was lying motionless on the ground. His body was contorted and twisted, as if he had been in great pain before he died. Tom and his friends were paralyzed with fear. The spirit was becoming more and more powerful, and they were running out of time. They had to confront the ghost and put an end to its torment, or risk being haunted for the rest of their lives. As they pressed on, the group felt the spirit closing in around them. Their movements were erratic and panicked, but they knew they had to stay focused if they were going to survive. In the distance, they could hear a low growl, a guttural sound that made their blood run cold. Tom knew that they were in the presence of something truly evil. They had to face it head-on and hope that they had the strength to overcome it. As they moved closer to the heart of the playing fields, they could feel the weight of the spirit's anger bearing down on them. Their final showdown was drawing near, and Tom knew that the fate of the group rested on their ability to defeat the malevolent spirit. The haunting had taken a dark and twisted turn, and they had to find a way to put an end to it before it was too late. Chapter 5: The Confrontation. Tom and his friends had no choice but to confront the ghost and put an end to its reign of terror. They knew that they were risking their lives, but they were determined to save themselves and anyone else who might fall victim to the spirit's wrath. With the help of an old schoolteacher, the group set out to uncover the dark history behind the playing fields and the ghost that haunted them. They pored over old school records and dug through dusty archives, piecing together the tragic story of a former student who had been wronged by the school and left to suffer a terrible fate on the playing fields. As they delved deeper into the past, the group began to understand the true nature of the malevolent spirit that had been plaguing them. They realized that it was not simply a vengeful ghost seeking revenge, but a manifestation of the school's darkest secrets and most shameful secrets. Despite the overwhelming danger, Tom and his friends refused to back down. They devised a plan to confront the ghost head-on and break the curse that had been haunting the school for decades. With the guidance of the old schoolteacher, they performed a powerful ritual that called forth the ghost and allowed them to confront it directly. The air was thick with tension as they stood face to face with the spirit, ready to do battle. At first, it seemed as though they were no match for the ghost's power. It unleashed a torrent of supernatural energy, hurling objects and causing the very foundations of the building to shake. But Tom and his friends refused to give up. They stood firm and called upon all their courage and strength to fight back against the spirit's wrath. As they battled the ghost, Tom and his friends began to understand that they were not just fighting for themselves, but for the school and all the students who had suffered at the hands of the malevolent spirit. They knew that they had to succeed, no matter the cost. Finally, after what seemed like hours of intense struggle, they succeeded in breaking the curse and banishing the ghost back to the other side. The school was finally free of its dark past, and Tom and his friends could rest easy, knowing that they had saved countless lives from the grip of the supernatural. Chapter 6: The Aftermath. As the night draws to a close, the group emerges, shaken but relieved that their ordeal is finally over. They take a moment to catch their breath and look around at the once familiar grounds of their old school, now shrouded in darkness and eerie stillness. Tom feels a mix of emotions, grateful to be alive and to have been able to help his friends lay the spirit to rest, but also overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they have just experienced. He looks at his old classmates, who all seem to be in a state of shock and disbelief, trying to come to terms with what they have witnessed. As they make their way back to the main building, they pass by the playing fields, which are now eerily quiet and empty. Tom can't help but think back to the night before, when they were running for their lives from a vengeful spirit. Suddenly, he feels a hand on his shoulder and turns around to see his old schoolteacher, Mr. Johnson, standing behind him. The elderly man looks at Tom with a kind expression and nods knowingly. "You did well, Tom," he says softly. "You and your friends have put an end to a terrible curse that has haunted this place for far too long." Tom feels a sense of pride and accomplishment at Mr. Johnson's words, and also a deep respect for the old man who has played a crucial role in their victory over the malevolent spirit. As they reach the main building, the group is met by a small crowd of teachers and staff members, who are all relieved to see them safe and sound. Tom and his friends are welcomed back with open arms, and the rest of the night is spent sharing stories and memories, both happy and sad. As the reunion draws to a close, Tom finds himself saying goodbye to his old classmates with a heavy heart. He feels a sense of nostalgia and longing for the simpler times of his youth, but also a renewed sense of purpose and determination. He knows that his experience at the reunion has changed him forever, and that he will never forget the lessons he has learned about the power of the supernatural and the importance of facing our fears. As Tom heads back home, he feels a sense of calm and contentment wash over him. He knows that his journey is far from over, but he also knows that he is ready to face whatever challenges come his way, armed with the knowledge and strength he has gained from his experiences at the old school. The story ends with Tom looking up at the night sky, feeling grateful for the new beginning that lies ahead of him.